How's it going, everybody? My name is Max, and today I'm going to be reading the preface to the first edition of Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, translated by Norman Kent Smith, published by Palgrave and Macmillan. I'm on page 7. Human reason has this peculiar fate that in one species of its knowledge, it is burdened by questions which, as prescribed by the very nature of reason itself, it is not able to ignore, but which, as transcending all its powers, it is also not able to answer. The perplexity into which it thus falls is not due to any fault of its own. It begins with principles which it has no option save to employ in the course of experience, and which this experience at the same time abundantly justifies it in using it. Rising with their aid, since it is determined to this also by its own nature, to ever higher, ever more remote conditions, it soon becomes aware that in this way, the questions never ceasing, its work must always remain incomplete, and it therefore finds itself compelled to resort to principles which overstep all possible empirical employment, and which yet seem so unobjectionable that even ordinary consciousness readily accepts it. But by this procedure, human reason precipitates itself into darkness and contradiction, and while it may indeed conjecture that these must be in some way due to concealed errors, it is not in a position to be able to detect them. For since the principles of which it is making use transcend the limits of experience, they are no longer subject to any empirical test. The battlefield of these endless controversies is called metaphysics. Time was when metaphysics was called the queen of the sciences, and if the will be taken for the deed, the preeminent importance of her accepted tasks give her every right to this title of honor. Now, however, the changed fashion of the time brings her only scorn. A matron outcast and forsaken, she mourns like Hecuba. Government under the administration of the dogmatists was at first despotic, but inasmuch as the legislation still bore traces of the ancient barbarism, her empire gradually through intestine wars gave way to complete anarchy, and the skeptics and a species of nomads despising all settled modes of life broke up from time to time all civil society. Happily, they were few in number and were unable to prevent its being established ever anew, although on no uniform and self-consistent plan. In more recent times, it has seemed as if an end might be put to all these controversies, and the claims of metaphysics receive final judgment through a certain physiology of the human understanding, that of the celebrated Locke. But it has turned out quite otherwise, for however the attempt be made to cast doubt upon the pretensions of the supposed queen by tracing her lineage to vulgar origins and common experience, this genealogy has, as a matter of fact, been fictitiously invented, and she has still continued to uphold her claims. Metaphysics has accordingly lapsed back into the ancient time-worn dogmatism, and so again suffers that depreciation from which it was to have been tried and found wanting. The prevailing mood is that of weariness and complete indifferentism. The mother in all sciences of chaos and life, but happily in this case, the source, or at least the prelude of their approaching reform and restoration. For it at least puts an end to that ill-applied industry which has rendered them dark, confused, and unserviceable. But it is idle to feign indifference to such inquiries, the object of which can never be indifferent to our human nature. Indeed, these pretended indifferentists, however they may try to disguise themselves by substituting our popular tone for the language of the schools, inevitably fall back, insofar as they think at all, into those very metaphysical assertions which they profess so greatly to despise. Nonetheless, this indifference showing itself in the midst of flourishing sciences and effacing precisely those sciences, the knowledge of which, if attainable, we should at least of all care to dispense with, is a phenomena that calls for attention and reflection. It is obviously the effect, not of levity, but of the matured judgment of the age, which refuses to be any longer put off with illusory knowledge. It is a call to reason, to undertake anew the most difficult of all its tasks, namely that of self-knowledge, and to institute a tribunal which will assure to reason its lawful claims and dismiss all groundless pretensions, not by despotic decrees, but in accordance with its own eternal and unalterable laws. This tribunal is no other than the critique of pure reason. I do not mean this by a critique of books and systems, but of the faculty of reason in general, in respect of all knowledge, after which it may strive independently of all experience. It will therefore decide as to the possibility or impossibility of metaphysics in general, and determine its sources, its extent, and its limits, all in accordance with these principles. I have entered upon this path, the only one that has remained unexplored, and flatter myself that in following it, I have found a way of guarding against all those errors which have hitherto set reason in its non-empirical employment at variance with itself. I have not evaded its questions by pleading the insufficiency of human reason. On the contrary, I have specified these questions exhaustively, according to principles, and after locating the point at which, through misunderstanding reason, come into conflict with itself, I have solved them to its complete satisfaction. The answer to these questions has not, indeed, been such as a dogmatic and visionary insistence upon knowledge might lead us to expect, that can be catered for only through magical devices, in which I am not adept. Such ways of answering them are indeed not within the intention of the natural constitution of our reason, and inasmuch they have their source in misunderstanding, it is the duty of philosophy to counteract their deceptive influence, no matter what prized and cherished dreams may have been disowned. In this inquiry I have made completeness my chief aim, and I venture to assert that there is not a single metaphysical problem which has not been solved, or for the solution of which the key at least has not been supplied. Pure reason is indeed so perfect a unity that if its principle were insufficient for the solution of even a single one of all the questions to which it gives birth, we should have no alternative but to reject the principle, since we should then no longer be able to place implicit reliance upon it in dealing with any one of the other questions. While I am saying this, I can fancy that I detect in the face of the reader an expression of indignation mingled with contempt at pretensions seemingly so arrogant and vainglorious. Yet they are incomparably more moderate than the claims of all those writers who, on the lines of the usual program, profess to provide the simple nature of the soul or the necessity of the first beginning of the world. For while such writers pledge themselves to extend human knowledge beyond limits of all possible experience, I humbly confess that this is entirely beyond my power. I have to deal with nothing save reason itself and its pure thinking. And to obtain complete knowledge of these, there is no need to go far afield, since I come upon them on my own self. Common logic itself supplies an example how all the simple acts of reason can be enumerated completely and systematically. The subject of the present inquiry is the kindred question: how much can we hope to achieve by reason when all the material and assistance of experience are taken away? So much as regard completeness in our determinations of each question, and exhaustiveness in our determinations of all the questions with which we have to deal. These questions are not arbitrarily selected. They are prescribed to us by the very nature of knowledge itself as being the subject matter of our critical inquiry. As regards the form of our inquiry, certainty and clearness are two essential requirements, rightly to be exacted from anyone who ventures upon so delicate an understanding. As to certainty, I have prescribed to myself the maxim that in this kind of investigation it is no wise permissible to hold options. Everything, therefore, which bears any manner of resemblance to an hypothesis is to be treated as contraband. It is not to be put up for sale even at the lowest price, but forthwith confiscated immediately upon detection. Any knowledge that professes to hold a priori lays claims to be regarded as absolutely necessary. This implies still more to any determination of all pure a priori knowledge, since such determination has to serve as the measure and therefore as the supreme example of all apodictic philosophical certainty. Whether I have succeeded in what I have undertaken must be left altogether to the reader's judgment. The author's task is solely to adduce grounds, not to speak as to the effect which they should have upon those who are sitting in judgment. But the author, in order that he may not himself innocently be the cause of any weakening of his arguments, may be permitted to draw attention to certain passages, which, although merely incidental, may yet occasion some mistrust. Such timely interventions may serve to counteract the influence which even quite undefined doubts as to these minor matters might otherwise exercise upon the reader's gratitude in regard to the main issue. I know no inquiries which are more important for exploring the faculty which we entitle understanding, and for determining the rules and limits of its employment, than those I have instituted in the second chapter of the Transcendental Analytic under the title The Deduction of the Pure Concepts of the Understanding. They are also those which have cost me the greatest labor, as I hope, not unwarranted. This inquiry, which is somewhat deeply grounded, has two sides. The one refers to the objects of pure understanding and is intended to expound the reader and render intelligible and objective validity of its a priori concepts. It is therefore essential to my purpose. The other seeks to investigate the pure understanding itself, its possibility, and the cognitive faculties upon which it rests, and so deals with it in its subjective aspect. Although this latter exposition is of great importance for my chief purpose, it does not form an essential part of it. For the chief question is always simply this: what and how much can the understanding and reason know apart from all experience? Not how is the faculty of thought itself possible? I'm going to say that again. The chief question is always simply this: what and how much can the understanding of reason know apart from all experience? Not how is the faculty of thought itself possible. The latter is, as it were, the search for the cause of a given effect. And to that extent,